Hello everyone, and welcome back to another installment of DLC Hitbox Analysis. This time we're taking a look at the newly added Pyra and Mythra. While Xenoblade is on the list of RPGs I've wanted to try, I've never really had the time to give it a good shot yet. But as far as Smash goes, Shulk is actually one of my favorite characters to play, so perhaps Pyra and Mythra will be as well. With them being two characters in one, today will be a bit of a double feature, as we'll be looking at both. We have a lot of hitboxes to look at today, so we might as well get right into it. As usual, today's hitboxes were made by Zeckemyro. There are links to everything in the description. Oh, and also I just want to mention that I will now be streaming on Twitch going forward. I've been doing a few test streams so far, and they have been a lot of fun. So if that should interest you, I'd appreciate it if you gave the Twitch channel a follow. More on this at the end of the video. Anyhow, on to Pyra and Mythra. Now, despite being identical in a lot of regards, Pyra and Mythra do have some very distinct characteristics that make them unique. Pyra is the stronger and slower out of the two, while Mythra is the quicker, less powerful one. Pretty standard character dynamic. This reflects not only in their movement, but also in their frame data, where Pyra is usually a few frames slower than Mythra, but has stronger and sometimes larger hitboxes. There are some other differences. Pyra weighs a little more than Mythra, meaning she will live longer on average. Their directional air dodges actually have drastically different ranges. A vast majority of characters have the standard air dodge length. However, Pyra's air dodge is actually slightly worse than the average, only having slightly more range than the worst one in the game belonging to Little Mac. Mythra, on the contrary, have an above average air dodge length, being very close to the distance of Ness and Lucas's air dodges. Aside from that, the last thing to mention is that Mythra actually has a unique dodge mechanic, kinda like Bayonetta's Bat Within. The way this works is that her dodge intangibility comes out a few frames slower than usual. However, from frame 2 until the intangibility is active, she has a special dodge property called Foresight. If you hit Mythra while Foresight is active, you'll be slowed down. You can see all the specifics here in the chart made by Mishima. Unlike Bat Within, you can actually act fast enough to punish your opponent after hitting you, meaning her dodges are not only effectively frame 2, but they also have undeniable upside to them. This is a very powerful mechanic and basically just a free bonus. It's very DLC to say the least. Alright, onward to their actual hitboxes. Again, like I mentioned earlier, Pyra's attacks are generally slower than Mythra's, but they also deal more damage and knockback. I won't be mentioning this every time since it would be a bit redundant, but do keep it in mind. Disregarding startup and lag, jab is basically the same for both characters with some minor differences. Jab 1 and 2 are actually identical, looking like this. They have 3 hitboxes which all just stun you in place. The final launch rate is actually slightly different, with Pyra having an additional hitbox, and as a result a bit more range. The angles are also slightly different, with Pyra using Sakurai angles while Mythra uses regular ones. Alternatively, you can enter into a rapid jab, which is just a single hitbox. In this case, Pyra's hitbox is actually slightly smaller, and the same is true for the launcher. Their F-tilt is fairly simple. Mythra's consists of 4 hitboxes, which all have the same damage and knockback. Pyra's looks like this. Just like with jab, it has an additional hitbox, giving it a bit more range. The angles here are also noticeably sharper, making them better for getting KOs. It's a pretty good move. It really has a lot of range, all things considered, and seeing how there are only sweet spots here, it's a very good spacing tool and kill option, of course depending on which character you're playing. Down tilt is where the hitboxes really start to diverge from each other. Unlike F tilt, this time Mythra is the one with the extra hitbox. The two the closest are the sour spots, while the tippers deal a grand total of 1 more damage. They just launch up and actually have pretty good combo potential. Pyra is much the same, having 3 hitboxes that all launch up. Her hitboxes, however, have a lot more vertical range, and they also have slightly more horizontal range as well. Despite being slower than Mythra's down tilt, it seems like you can still combo out of it, which is nice. Their up tilts are pretty standard overhead swipes covering the area around them. The moves are once again quite similar across the two characters. Mythra's looks like this and has 4 hitboxes, all of which have the same damage and knockback. It starts out slightly behind her, but not really enough to catch anyone but the larger side of the cast. It then moves all the way from behind her to in front, where it also covers the ground in front of her. Pyra is pretty much the same here, just with an additional hitbox, giving it a bit more effective range. For a bit of a change today, we're also going to be looking at some interpolated hitbox visuals. I went over this not too long ago, but I'll briefly explain it here as well. When a character uses a move where the hitboxes move around a lot, in order to prevent that move from missing, the move uses hitbox interpolation to make sure the move is more consistent. This results in a sort of smear effect between the active frames, meaning that most moves do in fact cover a bit more than they initially let on. You can see this on their up tilts here. The hitboxes are effectively the same, but in these visuals the interpolation is visualized, making them a bit truer to how they would look in the game. All hitboxes in Smash are interpolated, but it only really matters on moves that move around a lot. It's also not the easiest thing to visualize on a lot of moves, which is why you don't see it too often, but we do have a few here today, so I hope you enjoyed them. If this move actually covered behind them as well, combined with Mythra's frame data, this move would have been stupidly good. But as it stands, it's just, you know, really good. Their dash attacks are pretty much the same for both characters, only having minor range differences. They both consist of 2 hitboxes. The one the farthest away is the sweet spot, dealing a little more damage. Pyra's dash attack also has slightly more range than Mythra's, but aside from that they are pretty much the same. As far as the grabs go, they are all the same range. They have fairly standard grab range, but they are a bit more disjointed, because of how their arms don't reach forward very much. Their other grab variants are a bit better. and they also seem to get some combos off her grab. And combine that with Mythra's speed and you have yourself a very strong grab game. Now let's have a look at some aerials. Nair is another quite distinct move between the two characters. Mythra's neutral air consists of 3 hitboxes, rotating around her as she swings her sword. The move is a multi-hit that keeps the opponent inside until the launcher activates, which simply launches them away. The move also has a landing hitbox on Nair, which I guess is just standard DLC procedure at this point. It looks like this and also just launches away. I also want to mention that the launcher hit actually has a leftover Arronlink angle hitbox overlapped with another launcher hit, which is likely an oversight seeing how that angle does not actually launch you, though it is covered by another hitbox of higher priority, so it will never actually take effect, but I thought it would be fun to mention it anyways. As for Pyra, her Nair is not a multi-hit, but still has the same sword swinging going on as Mythra. She, however, only has 2 hitboxes that just launch away. Pretty simple in that regard. She also does not have the landing hitbox that Mythra has, so that's pretty much it for hers. Their forward airs are honestly like kinda busted. If you need proof, well, let's just have a look at the first active frame of the move. It's got 6 hitboxes, which are all just clustered together along the sword. They are all completely identical in terms of damage and knockback. The fact that this first frame covers so low to the ground means that you can easily just hit people who are on the ground or lower in the air. The move continues in a swipe, going all the way from the bottom and all the way up to above Mythra. While the move does drop a few hitboxes along the way, it still covers a massive amount of range. This hitbox is stupidly good, and especially seeing how fast it is on the frame data side. The light blue hitbox kinda bothers me a little bit. It's such a safety wheel hitbox, just to make sure that you hit characters that are slightly lower than you might have expected. It's very DLC. Pyra's Fair is similar except even bigger, and has yet another hitbox added for some reason. It's the same swipe upwards, capable of scooping up anyone unfortunate enough to be nearby. This move is like the reverse of Shulk's Sword Air, covering so much area upwards instead of down, which I guess would make sense since they are from the same series, but man, why do all the Xenoblade characters get to have the really big sword hitboxes? Rest of us just have to settle for like normal sword hitboxes. Back air is a lot like forward air, in the sense that it is a bunch of sword hitboxes in a line, accompanied by a huge hitbox lower to cover any potential blind spots. But in this case, it's way bigger. For Mythra, it's much the same story where she swings her sword behind her, and the hitboxes simply follow the sword, though the move does have some sour spots on the later hits of the move. Pyra is also the same, but with an even bigger hitbox to cover potential blind spots, and an additional hitbox on her sword that gives her more range. The move covers a huge amount of area, but at this point I don't think I need to point that out. As for upper, it's a fairly standard overhead sword swing that a lot of other swordies have. The hitboxes cover above Mythra, but doesn't really cover much in front or behind her. Mythra has 4 hitboxes while Pyra has 5. Granting her a bit more range overall. There's not too much more to say about it. It's not the best move they have, but if we're going to compare it to Shulk again, it's certainly a lot better. Lastly, for their aerials, we have down air, which is once again the usual sword swipe below Mythra. Mythra's down air is fairly uninteresting. It's nice for covering her landings and doesn't have too much lag, but besides that it's just a hitbox that launches away. Pyra's down air is a lot more exciting however, as it actually spikes, and boy does it spike. On the 2 first frames of the move, every single one of her 5 hitboxes spike. And this is no weak spike either, it really sends you places. If that wasn't enough, you can easily land it on stage and combo it into a whole bunch of moves. After the spiking frames, they simply launch you away, though they are still very powerful. Here is also an interpolated version of down air for both characters, which really shows off how much more range they really have. With the addition of down air, Mythra and Pyra actually have a complete potential coverage of all angles with their aerials, with all of them covering 90 degrees or more, meaning they can cover above, behind, in front, and below with safe disjointed moves that all have solid range on them, which is something a lot of other characters lack. Most usually have control over certain angles, but almost all characters have at least a few angles they can't immediately cover, like Sephiroth for example, where he has very good coverage above him, but to the sides he has a very hard time covering all angles other than directly in front of him without moving. Having access to this might not seem immediately that impressive, but it's actually quite rare. Now we're going to be taking a look at their specials, which certainly are some specials to say the least. They are all unique to the different characters, so we have a bunch of stuff going on here. I guess we can start with down B since that is the only one that does not have a hitbox, and by that I mean there is pretty much nothing to talk about. It's the way you switch between Mythra and Pyra, and besides the brief intangibility you get while switching, the move is unremarkable. Their up Bs are Prominence Revolt and Ray of Punishment individually. Ray of Punishment is Mythra's up B. It starts with Mythra rising up into the air, where a whole bunch of hitboxes trace after her sword on the way up. They all launch at different angles and attempt to set up into the projectile part of the move. If you hold the button down, you get Chroma Dust, which consists of 5 projectiles being shot towards the ground. They cover a good amount of area in total and are spread out nicely. They don't deal too much damage, but does launch the opponent away. Here is also an interpolated version of the move if you were curious. If you simply tap W, you get the other finisher for Ray of Punishment, which is just a single concentrated shot. Prominence Revolt has 3 hitboxes that follow Pyra as she ascends into the air. They all just stun you and slightly launch you up a bit. Pyra then falls back to the ground with a single hitbox that spikes the opponent, which should set up into the final part of the move where it launches away. On the first frame after landing, the move has 2 hitboxes that stick through the ground. After this, however, the hitboxes grow into a massive explosion of fire that packs quite the punch. The hitboxes stay out for quite a while, though they do get a bit weaker. While it may not be the best in terms of recovery, it can certainly be good for covering on ledge or used as a random burst option. Both of their side Bs are pretty nuts. Mythra's side B is Photon Edge, where she just kinda does this. She warps around and swings her sword all over the place. As you might expect by that description of the move, the hitboxes are also all over the place. On the first few frames, there are some hitboxes in front of Mythra, which launches the opponent backwards. After this, Mythra warps around and appears to deliver a strike and then vanishes again, making for an overall very disjointed and hard to challenge move. The first strike looks like this, where she knocks you further back. The move continues with similar hitboxes like this, having different configurations and shapes, though they all serve the purpose of keeping you within the move, so there's not too much to say about them, as they do seem to do their job in that regard. The move is all over the place in more ways than one. All the hitboxes do have the same damage, although obviously the angles differ wildly. I'm sure there will be situations where one of these hitboxes might launch you slightly off the mark, but given that there are so many of them, it's likely they'll just catch you anyways. It finishes with a pretty massive launcher hit that launches you away, although it's not particularly powerful. You may be wondering how you can hit Mythra during this move, seeing how she moves around so much. Well, the answer is actually quite simple, as the Mythra that appears and delivers the sword swings are not actually the hurt box of the character. The real Mythra is actually still there, but invisible and is moving forward along with the move, as you can see in this visual, meaning a projectile or a very disjointed move can still hit her and knock her out of it. Although relative to her precision, the move is very disjointed and will be hard to challenge without a projectile. And while this move might seem quite oppressive, do keep in mind that it loses to shields hard, and has a ton of end lag afterwards. Though as far as burst options to cover large amounts of ground at once, you're probably not going to be seeing better. Pyra's side B is Blazing End. It's a projectile where Pyra just throws her entire sword forward, if only other sword characters can do this. The line between projectile characters and swordies would be a lot smaller. The move first initially has a hitbox on Pyra as she throws the sword. It looks like this, and intends to launch the opponent into the actual projectile part of the move, which is a bunch of hitboxes that follow after the sword and try to knock you backwards along with it. After a while, it stops moving and starts spinning around, and continues to trap the opponent within it, before doing a final swing that launches them away. The hitboxes themselves are actually pretty big and cover a wide amount of area. The one thing that is very unique about it, if you could call it that, is that while the projectile is out, you cannot use any moves with Pyra at all. You can still move around, but all of her moves, even the ones that don't use the sword, are locked off until it returns, which itself has a bit of lag, so you need to be mindful of that. Lastly, out of their specials is Neutral B. Hopefully these will be a little less crazy than their other Oh. Why? What even is that? Let's start with Mythra. Her Neutral B is Lightning Buster, and it actually has active hitboxes during the charge startup. There are 3 of them above her, and they follow her hand as they move backwards. It kinda looks like she's holding up a little snowman. I like it. The hitboxes all launch down, which is to set up into the hitboxes that come after she releases the move. They really don't have a lot of hit stun, so you have to release the move almost immediately if you wanted to combo. As for the actually released part of the move, the first frame looks like this. It has 5 massive hitboxes with a lot of different angles. The reason why there's so many of them is because they wanted to make sure this move also worked in the air as well as on the ground. The lower ones launch you upwards in case the move should connect a little too low, while the remaining 3 hitboxes launch you slightly upwards, or simply stun you in place. The second hit is 2 hitboxes behind Mythra that launch you in front of her, so even if you are behind her, you can still get hit by this move. The third hit has like way too many hitboxes. They all deal the same damage and do largely overlap each other, and they also nearly have all the same angles. Neither do any of them distinguish between grounded and aerial hits either, so that's not the reason why there's so many of them either. They seemingly just kind of slapped a bunch of hitboxes on here and called it a day. Hey, I mean, as long as it works. After this, there is another hit with a bunch of overlapped hitboxes that just stun or launch up slightly, before we finally have the launch rate that is a huge hitbox that launches away. The sword hitbox is simply just for show at this point. The huge orange hitbox really just kinda steals the show here, and it also lasts 1 frame longer than the sword hitbox. Alright, moving on. What do you mean there's another version of the move? Oh, really now? This is the full charged version of the move. It deals more damage and has larger hitboxes, as well as a few extra ones. And extra really is the keyword here. Unlike its non-charged counterpart, a few of the hitboxes also launch back as well, though out of those hitboxes you have the highest priority and the lowest priority right next to each other, which is just kinda weird, since they both overlap with the orange hitbox, but only the red one will be capable of out-prioritizing it. I can't really get over how disgusting this move is sometimes. Like on this frame where it has 8 hitboxes when it could do with like 2? You know? Like, was it really necessary to make it be like this? This version works pretty much the same as the last one in terms of how it stuns and launches you, but it's just even bigger, so, you know, there you have it. Pyra's neutral beam Nova Flame is also equally as confusing to look at because of course it has to be. Pyra spins around while her sword swings around her, stunning the opponent. When she finishes, she brings her hands down and creates an explosion that launches them away. The hitboxes look like this. Yup. Those are some hitboxes. There are 9 of them, and each individual hitbox has its own angle to keep the opponent in place, depending on whether they are grounded or aerial. The second part is the same, except now the hitboxes are mirrored and launched the other way. Depending on how long you charge the move, the hitboxes appear more frequently on the side, which in turn results in more damage. The move flickers like this until the second part of the move activates, where the explosion happens, which thankfully is just a singular huge hitbox that launches away. I really never thought I would miss these as much as I do right now. Finally, we are down to the last moves, that being their smash attacks. Mythra's up smash is a multi-hit. It starts out having a few scoop hitboxes in front of her that launch up into the coming multi-hits. It then effectively becomes 4 hitboxes that trap the opponent, and keeps them there until the launcher comes out. Pretty standard multi-hit affair. Pyra's up smash, however, is a lot more simple, which after those specials is right up my alley. It only technically has one singular hitbox that moves from down in front of her to above her. It only hits once, but when it hits, it's quite a force to be reckoned with. It stays out for quite a while, and the hitbox size is very large. Definitely a powerful pair of up smashes. Their F smashes are pretty impressive all things considered, and given how much we have looked at today, there is a lot to consider. Mythra's F smash is fairly simple, consisting of 5 hitboxes. They just follow the sword as she swings towards the ground. It has a ton of horizontal range and covers a lot of the airspace in front of Mythra as well. This is especially exemplified in the interpolated version of the move, which I do actually have a visual for. It really makes the move look a lot more scary, doesn't it? Pyra's F smash is pretty much the same story, except it's way slower, but way more powerful. The hitboxes are also spread a bit differently, giving it more range. Here is also the interpolated version of this move as well, really showing off the destructive power of this move, with the range being more than the entire length of Pyra's body. And for our final 2 hitboxes of the day, we have down smash. Mythra sticks her sword out in front of her and kicks her other leg behind her, and then kind of spins around on her remaining leg. Pretty impressive, to be honest. The move has 4 hitboxes, all of which have differing damage values actually. So, you mean to tell me that after all those moves with like 7 different hitboxes that had no sour spots, this is where you finally decided to stick some sour spots? Really now, the hitboxes on the sword are the strongest, then followed by the hitboxes on her sword arm, then the outer leg hitbox, and then finally the inner leg hitbox is the weakest. As she spins, so do the hitboxes, and they disappear and reappear again. But now they are mirrored to keep in line with Mythra moving. And for our final Pyra hitbox, which to nobody's surprise is pretty much the same as Mythra's, just a little bit bigger and more powerful. Just the way it always has been. But that was all of Pyra's and Mythra's hitboxes. That was a lot to cover, not only in volume but also in spectacle. There are a lot of very unique hitboxes in the mixer, and it was pretty fun to cover most of them, even if some of them were a little outrageous. I like these characters though, they're fun to play and kinda take some of the right boxes for me. Definitely want to test them more out in the future. But to finish out what I mentioned earlier, I'm now going to be streaming going forward. I'm aiming to do it at least once a week, and it will mostly happen on weekends, usually on Saturdays around the time on screen right now, which I'll make up my mind on later. Not surprisingly, I'll be playing Smash for the most part, doing viewer battles and other online activities. So if that should interest you, there's a link to the Twitch channel in the description. I hope to see you there. In any case, I hope you enjoyed the video, and until next time, thank you for watching.